All right, my clock has 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to WiLSWorld Shorts. I'm Andy Coffin. I'm Communications and Consortia Manager with WiLS, and I'm excited to share the work of our guests with you today, which is Digital Equity Project, funded by the Digital Public Library of America, or DPLA. DPLA launched the Digital Equity Fund around its own core values, a belief in the power of collaboration, a focus on equity and inclusion, and the potential for technology to positively transform the way libraries and archives work. Today's guests have been working on such a collaboration between UW-Milwaukee Libraries, Milwaukee Women's Art Library. I am pleased, oops, I'm also trying to switch slides here. Oh heavens, no, we don't want that. Here we go. I'm pleased to introduce Celeste Contreras and Derek Webb. Celeste Contreras, who uses she, they pronouns, is a Chicana indigenous artist who works in mixed mediums to share stories of ceremony, palimpsests, and memory with reflections of identity. Her work includes illustrations, print, book arts, fiber arts, and animation. A recent graduate and a new professor of UW-Milwaukee's Peck School of the Arts, she earned an MFA in 2022, focused in print and narrative form, and holds a BFA from Alverno College. Contreras was the 2019 Gathering Art, Stories, and Place Artist in Residence with the Milwaukee Public Library, where she published a 200-edition box set of artist books called Artist in the Library. Contreras is a resident artist at the House of Rad, which is a creative collective of artists, and she's managing Studio Tequilo and Library, which is an artist book library established in 2022. Derek, who uses he, him pronouns, is the head of archives at the University of Milwaukee Libraries. In this position, Webb supervises professional staff and interns, sets the department's strategic directions, oversees its major archival functions, and directs the archives department's outreach, donor relations, and collection appraisal activities. Coordinates the university's records management program as well. And Derek has worked as an archival professional since 2013 and has been in his current position since 2020. And with that, I'm going to turn the show over to Derek and Celeste and let them share their project with you.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me see. I'm just going to share here. All right. So I will start out by talking with you a little bit about the Milwaukee Women's Art Library and its creation. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Digital Equity Fund grant and us signing on as part of that. And then I will turn it over to Celeste, who will show you much more interesting slides about the kinds of things that we've been collecting. And then we will finish up by talking a little bit about lessons learned and challenges and such, and take questions. But we will also take questions at any point. If you have one, or if inspiration strikes you, please feel free to chime in whenever you would like. So the Milwaukee Women's Art Library is, as you can see here, what it was when we received it anyway. I think maybe the better way to start would be to discuss its creation. Here we go. So it starts with at the time, local artist and graduate student named Ashley Jenke, who was trying to research women in the Milwaukee art scene, and found that while it was much easier for her to find historical resources on male artists, it was much more difficult to find information on anybody else. So she connected with Shana McCaw, who was at the time a curator at the Charles Alice, which is a local museum, and they decided to take on this work themselves of documenting this community. And so they created the Milwaukee Women's Art Library and started canvassing for historical records to add to it. And they found in 2020 that after having begun this and created this great collection, that their careers were starting to head in different directions. And they wanted to find a permanent repository for the materials that could kind of take on the work of building the collection going forward. So they connected with us at UW-Milwaukee, and my colleague Ann Hanlon, who's the head of digital collections and initiatives here, was kind of at the center of that. She and I met with Ashley and Shayna about taking on this collection and what we might do to continue building it. It's common in archival collections for them to still be sort of living collections that are taking new materials, but this one in particular, we felt was still kind of in its infancy. So we needed to make sure that we could continue building it so that it could reach its potential. Anne, meanwhile, had gotten a line on this grant opportunity with the Digital Public Library of America, who had gotten funding from the Mellon Foundation to create what they called the Digital Equity Fund, which is essentially a bunch of sub-grants that they were giving out to organizations and repositories that were using innovative methods to diversify the American digital archival record. So we had this idea of focusing on this collection, on the Milwaukee Women's Art Library, and funding a community ambassador to conduct outreach on it. So we envisioned a person who would be an artist, a member of the arts community, who had a strong interest in preserving history, but was primarily an artist rather than an archivist, say. And that the project would have sort of two phases. The first and kind of larger one would be, and is, for the community ambassador to identify potential donors to the collection, and make and facilitate the connections with us about building it, and then also more broadly to conduct outreach about preserving one's own historical records, in particular digital ones. While we do want to build the Milwaukee Women's Art Library, we also were able to kind of expand this and think just in terms of if we're getting more local artists, especially women, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and trans artists of color, to preserve their historical records, it's a win for us, whether or not they're ultimately giving those records to the Milwaukee Women's Art Library. So if they're donating the records to another repository, that's great. If they're, preserving them themselves, that's great. They're building collectives or community archives, that's great too. We just want to see that this history is preserved. And then the second part of the grant would be then where the community ambassador turns back towards us and kind of represents the artist community while we re-examine our own collecting and donation policies, to see if there are ways that we can better serve the needs of this community. So let's see, we end up securing the grant in October of 2022, and that's about when we brought Celeste on. And she has been working with us since then to build out this collection. And now I'm going to turn it over to her to talk with you a bit about some of the work that we've done.
Thank you, Derek. And thank you, Andrea, for the nice introduction. So as an artist in the Milwaukee community, most of my entire life, thinking of artists who I admire and love, and specifically thinking of elder artists. This is something I've thought about for a long time now, is what are these artists going to do with some of their homes have become museums, shrines of their collection, but then also bringing in the awareness of that there are these resources like at UW-Milwaukee that can help offer assistance to archiving. And then when this project came about, I was just incredibly excited and moved by that this was even being thought of. And so when the archives department asked me, if I was interested in this, it was truly a dream come true, even though I have really no idea what archivists do. And so it's been a huge learning curve for me during this entire time. And then also just connecting with different artists. So in this presentation, we're going to show you some of the artists who we've met with, specifically 3 different communities: the African community in Milwaukee, and the Latino community, and then the Indigenous community, as well as bringing in new language to help offer the Milwaukee Women's Art Library to be a space for more than just women. So we are offering a space for all artists who identify as trans, non-binary, and also other. So that's been a huge part of the learning and the time of this project too. And so right here in this slide, I wanted to show one of our first shout outs, one of our first flyers we made, asking people, have you thought about archiving your papers? And then on the other side, on the right side, you can see the very first invitation that Ashley Jenke and Shayna had created to the community. So I just wanted to show that because COVID interrupted their work, that we have continued to share this information, and also highlighting the work that they did. I think if we're talking about archival, we definitely want to preserve the work that started this. And Derek, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. And so as an artist and as somebody who chose UW-Milwaukee specifically for their library, because that's my interest. As an artist, I work in book arts, and librarian people are kind of more so my people. Not that artists aren't my people, obviously they are, but I love people who are offering information and have that space and that capacity to ask questions and rethink how things are done. And right away, when I met with Derek and Anne and the entire archive team that they have built there, right away it was this attention towards what are the ethical values also behind archiving. And so that sparked my interest in now I'm researching the history of archivists and the history of UW-Milwaukee. And then how do artists and archivists work together historically? And when somebody passes, what is their role to continue this narrative of this artist? And so right away, I went into the digital archives of UW-Milwaukee's website. And this is an image from the the Milwaukee Handicraft Project, 1939, 1945 era. And I just was so inspired by this room, their bookbinding in this photo. I believe this is at UWM campus before it was called UWM. And I was so excited about seeing what was actually happening at this time with the Milwaukee Handicraft Project, which was a WPA-funded project that funded over 700 women, a lot of women of color, and women who weren't even speaking English as their first language, all coming together, all being funded and paid to continue the crafts of what libraries do, what educators do. And so I just I had to be inspired and see the history before I can understand what Derek and I were about to embark on in our journey. And if you could go to the next slide, Derek. And so again, this photo is unbelievable to me. It could be a 2023 photo in the Peck School of the Arts art building today, watching women from all different backgrounds building books and binding books and just working together and knowing the importance of preserving this history. So these image, for me in particular, and I think for other artists who I've shared this with, have been sort of a motivator and a way to help artists understand to preserve their work and consciously while they're making it. I don't think a lot of artists are particularly interested or even conscious of that kind of preservation while they're working. But and I'll talk about that further when I start talking about the artists we visit. And this, thank you, Derek. This slide, this held a huge part for me in the motivation for me to understand the impacts of archiving without asking for permission of those people. And so, and what I mean by that is when I researched, more of the Milwaukee Handicraft Project, I found this image of Bernice Ware, who was a wig maker, doll maker, who then turned into a professional hairstylist and wig professional in the African-American community here in Milwaukee. And I was so excited to see this because, first of all, the dolls were made of multi-ethnic and multiracial dolls at the time, which I think as an artist and as somebody who does make dolls too, seeing this multiracial craft being made in Milwaukee, I was so excited to see that this actually was happening. And then I tried to find more about Miss Ware, and I kind of got stuck. I can't really find much more about her, but I am searching for who her family was and what happened to her. But the main point for me was that, did anybody ask her for this photo? Was she asked to be a part of this archive? And how did this then serve her community? And that was one of the main things that Derek and I have been very aware of when we step into other communities. And when we offer this service to artists, is our first question is always, how can this archive serve you? And what do you need from archives? And so, and then we'll go into now the the 5 Point neighborhood. The 5 Point neighborhood is at the intersection of Keefe and I-94 and MLK, and it's literally a 5 point intersection. And Fatima Laster is an incredible designer, interior designer and artist in the United States who chose to come back to her home city, Milwaukee, in her old neighborhood. And she bought this beautiful old funeral home, and now they house artists, their gallery space, and then their studios. And she also lives there. And so she invited us in to her space and was very excited to hear about this project and this opportunity to help her in her archives. And yeah, when we met with her right away, she took us around, showed us her space, and a lot of listening is happening. Watching Derek, just be so open and patient to hear all these stories. I really learned that archivists are storytellers and story keepers. And just watching the archivists in action, listening to the artists, sometimes for hours, we're listening to the artists talk about their stories, and then helping them understand what we're doing as, because we're not collecting art, we're collecting their papers. And so Fatima has been sharing lots of things with us, digital archives, as well as paper evidence. And so this letter in particular is from an artist who's in prison. And it really moved me because not only is Fatima such an incredible artist herself and a community artist, but I could see that she's getting several of these letters from people who are being inspired and helping them through their day-to-day, knowing that there's these community hubs that they could possibly one day go to or be supported by. And then I think it's important to mention too, right in the 5 points intersection there is the Milwaukee Women's Correctional Institute. There's a tiny little prison at the corner there too. And I think, I don't know, I just think it all just kind of came to a point where she's at an intersection that she's doing work on archiving the gentrification that's happening in her neighborhood. And the artwork that she's doing is sort of causing an uproar in emotions of people from all sides. But it's important work that she's doing. In particular, she's cutting down these signs that say like, we'll buy your home for cash. She has hundreds of these signs she's made into a quilt that, like, you know, I mean, they're plastic, but they're these plastic signs. And so the work that she's doing needs to be archived. And she's a person who's already been doing that work for her own community. And Derek, do you have anything to add to Fatima and her story?
I don't think so. Yeah, just you know, it was amazing to visit her house. And she has donated at this point a fair amount of mainly digital records in her case. Yeah, all kinds of different things. A lot of interactions with the city too, which has been interesting, the city government.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're continuing to work with her, and then her cohort of artists also. Some of them are already in the Milwaukee Women's Art Library. The biggest file we have is Evelyn Patricia Terry, who is the person I think of before I even met Derek, when I'm thinking, what are we gonna do with her house? You know, because she turned her entire house into a museum. So how do we, you know, help her? And so Ashley Jenke already had her added to the files, which, whew, good gracious, because she needed that space. And then we move into the River West neighborhood of Milwaukee, which is just down the road from the 5 Point neighborhood. And this collective, they were an unofficial anarchist collective called the Cream City Collectives. And it was a group of just radical artists and activists and educators in Milwaukee who took it upon themselves to create a collective where there was a silk screening workshop and meeting rooms and anarchist library and all of this sort of media-driven work. But they themselves were preserving all of the screens. So here is one of the screens that was given to me by Caitlin Redd. And she's an educator in Milwaukee who just moved out of state. So she was collecting all of this. Somehow she ended up with them. They actually used to be in my basement for a moment too. But so they kind of were like all around the community, but hundreds of these screens were burned and made. And if you know what silk screening is, it's basically like a stencil and you just like squeegee ink through this, like the white parts of this would be the screen. And then the other parts are blacked out. So it's like how t-shirts and a lot of print and media are made. But so I know that the Milwaukee Women's Art Library, we really don't take big, you know, amounts of stuff like this, but I think this in particular, this screen, I think it should be in the the M Wall and the Milwaukee Women's Art Library. And there's no like official person for this organization. They've all like moved all around the state or out of the state and around the country. And so it's been kind of difficult getting them all in one place. So we have still time to meet with them and organize their digital. They have a digital website that I think it's like a free blog or something. So that I think should definitely be added. So this is one of the artists or art collectives that's in progress right now. And then in the next slide, Derek, if you could go there, you can see they also used to make posters and flyers for different events in Milwaukee. And so they also donated a huge collection of this. And there's multiple prints of some of these. None of them are signed. I think only you can see like 37 of 50 is written in there. So there's no like fine art sort of archival signature within these, because it would have gone against their belief system within the collective that, you know, there's no ownership or copyrights on a lot of their work. So it was literally just to get the word out and have like this functioning collective that was producing work. So they're very unknown if you didn't know about them. So I thought it was a great addition to the Milwaukee Women's Art Library because they focus so much on trans rights. They have really beautiful trans posters and media that they helped get out. And so I'm slowly ringing them together to get more information, especially just to write up like a historical document on maybe a list of who some of the members were if they were interested in that. And then I think we're going next into Walker's Point neighborhood. This is Adam White Osers. Adam, we just met with Adam. What was it, this week or last week? Yeah. And so, yeah. Oh, what an amazing story Adam offered us. Adam has been documenting and archiving artists' work for years now. It's part of their business called Doc My Art. But they're also a practicing artist in Milwaukee. And this photo in particular is worth a million words because so much of their story right now and what they want to offer to contribute into the Milwaukee Women's Art Library is the transition of them from Christina to Adam, but it also was a transition during, in-person life to then COVID Zoom era. And so they have been documenting all of that during their time of transition, which almost mirrors the transition of the world. And they have this incredible binder of everything that they collected during COVID era, 2020 to like 2022, from the reimbursements, the governmental checks, the buying of masks, to takeout orders and menus, and the vaccination shots, and then the real importance of their story also. I mean, there's so many huge important points here, but in this photo, we're in VAR Gallery Studios, which is on 5th and Pierce Street. But Adam used to live in the apartment across the street, which in this photo you can actually see is the condo buildings that have been rebuilt since then. And then in the next slide, so you're seeing like the gentrification of their own neighborhood right in front of us. But at the same time, they're archiving in photos and documenting all of this transition of the South Side neighborhood. This is a photo of La Fuente, which was this Mexican restaurant that was there for years, and then it turned into the sports bar right before it was torn down. And then in the bowl, you see some of the tiles that were once in La Fuente's like courtyard. It was kind of like a Spanish colonial style building. And the La Fuente means fountain in Spanish. So there were all these fountains everywhere. And this is a traditional Talavera tile from Mexico that they ended up, you know, destroying it all. And Adam went there and picked up some of these pieces. And this is the continuation of the story of them being displaced from that apartment building to then being in their galleries, their studio space right there across the street, to now them continuing to tell this story and preserve what this, you know, displaced, gentrified communities are going through. And then also the narrative through all of this is that all of these artists we're meeting with and talking to, they're all connected. So while we're standing in Adam's studio, I see photos of Fatima, I see photos of Chella from Walker's Point Center for the Arts, who we're also working with. And so there's this thorough narrative throughout all of these. Everybody is strung together in some way. And I guess as the community ambassador, those were my decisions of who to choose to really thread that narrative through and have everybody connected in some way. And then this is the gallery. I mean, not the gallery. This is the apartments that were built, the condos in place where La Fuente used to be there. And then Adam's apartment building was right at this corner here. And so we were sitting in, you know, the studios, just kitty corner from there, listening to the story of this while we're looking at the building that's this now. And then Walker's Point Center for the Arts is just down the road from there, who we're also working with. So I think it's just important that not only the transitions of people and community, but of how this affects all of the lives. And then like what are we going to remember, and how do we preserve this when it's so traumatizing for some of us, or the people who are displaced from these areas. And I think Adam has been doing that really thoroughly and just really beautifully in the way that they take photos, and they're preserving all of this in photos and videos. And then I'm also, this is actually part of my own papers, but because I'm kind of a hoarder of papers and art supplies, and everything I've ever done is in the attic or was down here for a while, but I'm going through my own papers, and now I'm finding other stuff. So I started archiving the Strawberry Moon Women Singers group, which then, you know, brings out the indigenous community, but then it also focuses on Indian Summer, which came to a wrap in 2018, which was really devastating for our entire community, because Indian Summer, if nobody's ever heard of it or ever been to it, it was right at the Summerfest grounds on Lake Michigan in Milwaukee. And it was such a harmony of tribes and inner races all coming together. And I think one of the most special parts of Indian Summer Festival that happened in Milwaukee was there was a line within the festival that didn't allow alcohol to cross. So it really brought these two worlds together, this sort of patriarchal powwow, and then to the matriarch ceremony. And it just really was this balancing sort of grounding place. It was always the final festival of the year. It involved all of the festivals, and they would have this big drum unity session at the beginning of the Indian Summer. And so in this, you see the Shepherd Express here. Donna Yahola is standing there in the white and the purple in the front. and she was the founding member of the Strawberry Moon Women Singers group, and it was an all Indigenous women's hand drum group, and I was a member of it as well, and that's why I have some of these papers. And so then 2018 was the final Indian summer, and I kept one of the receipts that I had, the Three Sister Stew, and then the last ticket, you know, I'll ever have from Indian Summer, and then the brochure. And that was one of our final performances too. We opened up that Sunday of the festival, and they always have like a mass, and we sang at the mass like ceremony, and it was for her mom who had just passed away, who was also the elder of the Strawberry Moon Women Singer group. So so now I'm starting to create their file, and Donna lives on the Bad River Reservation up north, and so I'm working with her personally, just gathering what I have, and then she's going to start sending me things to then start this file, which I haven't included any performers yet, or we haven't included any performers yet, so that's exciting. And then finally my files, you know, I was like, oh, I need to do my stuff too. And so that was also a question at the beginning of this project. Can I add my own file to this? Really re-examining the ethics and the use of archives. Do I have permission to add my stuff to this? And right away, Derek is like, of course, you know, if that's what you want to do, you can do that too. And so now during this time that I'm collecting my papers, now I can offer better advice to other artists who are inviting, because now I'm going through the process. And I have to say, at the beginning of some of our meetings with some of the artists, they're kind of looking at us like, what do you want from us? Or like, you know, like kind of skeptical. And I think that's a sign of the misuse of artists of color and the exploitation, or the sense that, oh, you're just using what I've worked so hard for. And it's never been that case. We've always come to the door saying, we don't want anything from you. We're here to ask you and offer you this service. What do you need from archives, and what does that look like? And then we go from there. And so it's always been right at the front of the conversation. You don't have to give us anything unless you want to. You know, there's no fee involved, and this is a service. And thankfully, you know, UW-Milwaukee Library is a public source and resource for artists that, you know, we're allowed to be like, anyone can come here. That's the whole point of this. And so I almost feel like an ambassador for the library at times too, because I love the Milwaukee or the UWM library. It's one of my favorite libraries in the whole world. And so I'm always telling people, like, you can come here and use this. This is what it's for. And so then I started finding my papers. Some of my past work has been building parades and festivals. And during that time too, when I was doing all of this work for Day of the Dead, there would be artists or people in the community who would want to claim that they did this or they did that. And I never interrupted, you know, anybody's, you know, stories that they wanted to tell about what they had done, but it kind of empowered my story because I have the evidence and the proof of it. Like, I really did do this. And, you know, it kind of reassured my own story and actually kind of gave me pride in telling that story. Like, because the whole point of me doing Day of the Dead for my personal reasons was to remind my community of who we are and where we come from. So it was just to empower the community to remember who we are. And we are not monolithic, and we do not all celebrate Day of the Dead. And I think that's important to also bring up when I'm talking about my papers. And so I'm writing up the story of my experience of Day of the Dead, and I'm finding all of the permits I have on record, our old flyers, and lots and lots of boxes full of stuff. So I've been spending a huge majority of my summer doing that. And then this gives me good feedback for other artists, because I think when we have approached them, they're like, whoa, like after they get over the part, like maybe they can trust us and they understand this, it's almost like, whoa, like now you want me to do all this work, like going through all these papers and boxes and emails to then hand over. And so I understand that feeling, because that's exactly what I'm going through now. And so Derek's been so generous with his time and answering my own questions too. What if this, what if that? And so I have a lot more questions for you, Derek, as I go through my own files. But it's been important for me to do this so then I can help other artists as they start doing this sometimes daunting task. But, you know, once I got into it, I was having so much fun. You really just open up this whole world of memory. And I think when we were in Adam's studio and they opened up that binder of the COVID from the beginning to the end, like all of us were like, wow, I couldn't believe I forgot that. Or like, I'm so excited to see that paper you got signed by Donald Trump's crazy signature, you know, like it just sparked all of these memories that we all kind of can really relate to, but in our own way. And so that's what I've been doing. There's only 2 photos here. I have hundreds of photos I've been taking of all of my papers. And then, yeah, so I'm just so grateful to be a part of this project, and I have learned so much.
Yeah, so you know, coming here, we're now close to the end of the part where we're doing the outreach, and we've learned a number of things along the way. Had some challenges and things. I think, you know, one of the first things that we have picked up is that outreach is it's a long-term process, maybe longer than we'd perhaps thought coming in. It's not really a matter of just, you know, setting a meeting with someone and looking at their stuff and then taking it, you know, back to the archives, especially when we're talking about folks who are not, you know, I think what we often get, which is, you know, folks who are maybe at the end of their careers, or people leading organizations that are, you know, that are coming to an end, or things like that, with folks who are still very much working, their careers are still in the upswing in a lot of cases. They've not necessarily it's not that simple, really. And in particular, we found that it's usually that the records gathering phase, that's the one where the hangups sort of occur and where we get kind of where the waiting is. We have found, for the most part, that selling artists on needing to preserve their own papers is not a heavy lift. And we found that selling them on the Milwaukee Women's Art Library and UWM is not a heavy lift. It's afterwards, then when they go and it's time to actually gather all their stuff. But like I say, they're still working, they're still building, and so then the rest of their life and career kind of imposes itself, and this is, you know, not urgent. So that has taken some time. We've found, at least I found, that, you know, while I knew, and we knew coming in, and we expected that artist papers would have broader historical implications, right? It's not just about documenting the artist community, it's about documenting Milwaukee through the arts community. But even still, the papers have intersected with other parts of Milwaukee history in ways that I didn't always anticipate. You know, I had some idea that some of the organizations that we'd be working with would have some interactions with the city. I'm sure that some of them were working in, areas that were going through some changes. I knew that, but I didn't necessarily connect fully that the 5 Points Gallery, for instance, and Fatima would have, a lot of material related to predatory home buying in Harambe, and that, that we would have all of this material on gentrification in Walker's Point and old industrial sites being converted into artistic and cultural spaces in River West. And so there's some things that maybe, so the papers are in a lot of ways maybe even more historically relevant than I would have expected coming in. And I had pretty high expectations, I felt like. The other side of that is that as you saw in some of these slides, a lot of these folks that we're talking to, they're able to kind of see this historical significance in lots of different formats of things, old building tiles, and all sorts of stuff. And they're things that if we were to take them, they would require a fair amount of additional kind of contextual information. And so it's sometimes a challenge on how do we get that and make sure that it's added, where it needs to be. And then one surprise that that I had was when we were coming into this, I expected our conversations with artists, I expected a lot of that to be about intellectual property rights and copyright and their ability to keep selling their stuff. And, but that has not really at all been the case. When IP has come up in conversations with donors, it's because I brought it up. And I found that in general, artists we're not thinking about this. And so we've kind of, had those conversations at the end rather than at the beginning, which is what I'd been sort of expecting. So those are kind of lessons learned so far, and that's really before we turn to the next phase of this, the kind of policy review piece of it. And I suspect we're going to find even more questions coming into that. That's kind of where we are at the moment. So at this point, I think we can address some questions from the viewers, if you have any, or comments. Oh, I think I even see there's one chat. There is one here from Catherine. Thank you. How do you decide what papers to accept in the archives? Would this project have proceeded if you did not get the grant? Those are two separate and very good questions. So the archives has an existing collecting policy, and that helps to some degree. It at least outlines kind of in subject terms collecting priorities. It does less so in terms of format, those kinds of questions. And so we have to think about them in terms of how useful they are at illustrating the history of this person, this organization, this community, this city. That's kind of an overriding one. Our ability to preserve it is another question. Our ability to house it is a question. That's where, for instance, the silk screens become an issue, right? Hundreds of giant wood framed objects is a problem for storage. So, I think those are the main ones. We've also tried to avoid taking actual artists' work for the IP considerations that were mentioned earlier. We don't want to be taking from our donors' ability to, make their livelihood. So that's something we've generally avoided. Those are two main ones, or those are the main ones I think that are coming to mind. As far as the second question with this project, I proceeded if you didn't get the grant. I think yes, but more slowly. Outreach would definitely have been a heavier lift for sure. I feel pretty confident that I definitely would not have been as effective in identifying all the people and everything without Celeste here, for sure. So, so yes, but not as well, I guess is the answer. Thank you for the questions. That is true. Yes. But I think, yeah, I forget now, and Anne may remember the timeline better than me, but my recollection at this point is that the pursuit of a grant to do outreach was kind of part of the discussion pretty early, at least once I was here. I know some of the discussion, I think maybe even predated when I was here.
Yep, sorry, that's right. It was just before you came, we had met with Ashley and Shayna about the MWAL collection. So it was already part of the archives, but a much smaller, yeah. So and exactly how you said, Derek, sorry.
Right, no problem. And I do remember too, and maybe we'll never forget that the follow-up meeting was set to take place on March 17th, 2020. Do you remember that? Yep. Because we had to cancel it to all go home.
Yeah, so the grant did a lot to accelerate and expand and make it much better than it could have been, especially with Celeste on board. So
Thank you. Yeah. And I've even talked about too, after this project, after my time ends with the library, I'm still connected to UWM always and forever. And I will still be bugging artists and telling them about this collection. I've already promised that to Derek and Anne and to myself to continue to add to it. And that's always something we tell the artists we meet with. I've sent hundreds of emails to artists letting them know about this, whether they have the time or the capacity to even think about that. That's when they start coming in. If they don't, they can't. And so, yeah, that's something I will definitely be continuing to do, is using this also for myself. And I'm also letting my students know too that if you're interested in learning about Milwaukee artists, this could be a really great resource for you all to use. And that's also another question we always ask artists, is where will people in 100 years be able to research what you've done? And where will that evidence that you even existed be housed? And, like that's like an alarm to a lot of people, is so many artists are making things for that reason. Only how do we do that then when we're not here? And I think it's been a real eye-opener to a lot of artists that, oh, when we die, the archivist and the historian and whoever has our things get to piece the story together. So now's your chance to tell it yourself. What do you want to say about what the work you did, instead of somebody else, like Bernice Ware, one of the first slides. Was she asked, where is her family now? Did they even know she's part of this? And I think that breaks my heart, and it also wakes me up, because that's, to me, the urgency of preserving.
Any other questions for Derek or Celeste? All right. Well, thank you both so very much for the work on the project and for taking the time to share it with us today. Really appreciate your time and your energy to tell both the story of this project and also some of the stories of the artists. And it's really fantastic to see a library engaged in this level of community outreach work. Wonderful. I will be sharing a recording of today's meeting, so you will get that in your inbox if you registered, which I think everybody on the call has. And just a quick little plug for a couple of upcoming WiLSWorld shorts. On October 13th, we're going to be featuring three folks from throughout the state who are social workers working in and outside of libraries to talk about social work concepts in libraries. And then in November, on the 17th, WIL staff will be sharing some of the lessons they learned from experimenting with a 36-hour full-time work week this summer. That was quite an endeavor. So you can visit the website there to register for either of those. And again, thank you, Derek. Thank you, Celeste, so much for your time and your work. And I really appreciate it. And thanks for sharing with us today. And thanks to all the rest of you for attending. Have a wonderful day and a good weekend too.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.